The segment on unemployment. So know where you should anchor. The anchor is on the natural rate. Although the topic is called unemployment, but focus is on the natural rate for us to compare whether it is serious or not, and also to tell us how it affects your country's potential output. Okay, the next segment is on inflation, so I won't cover much because this is covered in Year 1 Economics. Just a quick run through. Inflation is percentage change in prices. And prices are not measured in dollars and cents. Prices are measured as a number called index. And the index starts from 100. And the prices that you measure is the average price level. Not for every single good, but for selected common basket of goods. Okay? Then, of course, you also must know how to read inflation rates. Alright, so inflation rate in most countries are positive. So that's why in the table you can see, right, we're always reading positive inflation rate telling us prices are always increasing. But is inflation serious or not? Then we must look at the indicator. Inflation is serious if it is positive and at the same time output drops. So imagine how people suffered. They have to pay for high prices for goods, yet they lost their jobs. So that is a phenomenon called stagflation. So later in topic 8, we will get to see. This is a very worrying sign that government find it hard to manage. Okay. However, if inflation rate is positive, yet the rate is falling, government don't really worry too much. And this is actually Singapore. Alright, in our recent past months, our inflation rate is still about 2 to 3%, but it was lower. It used to hit 5%, then it drops to about 4, then it drops to 3, now it hovers below 3. So such phenomenon is not price drop, it's inflation rate drop. But that is acceptable. So we call this disinflation. Right? However, you can put there, this is China. Inflation rate is positive and it is climbing upwards. It means prices not only are rising, but rising faster. It is worrying because we know wages cannot catch up. So the poor, the lowly income household cannot cope with cost of living. Okay? Then of course, in very rare cases, if inflation rate is positive and more than 50%, then we call it hyperinflation. So it happened, alright, in the past from, for example, Argentina. So you can go and Google, right, for hyperinflation to know what happens. So in the country, we are measuring prices, but in terms of percentage change. Okay, now why is inflation rate always positive? How come inflation rate will not be zero, or will inflation rate not be negative? Okay, so this is the indicator I gave in your lecture note, so you may want to take a quick look. Okay, remember you don't have to memorize data, but look at the screen. Look at our famous example, Japan. A country which we thought is facing deflation, right? Always stuck at the liquidity trap. But despite of her poor economic outlook, she still has somewhat positive level of inflation. Look at the two bars. What contributed inflation even in a weak economy like Japan is primarily energy prices, which we know is usually oil prices. Oil prices affect all corners of our life. It affects transport prices, it affects electricity. Alright, so that is inevitable. And oil prices have no signs of really plunging. It slows down, but there is no sign that it's going to dip tremendously. Alright, so oil prices will still be a threat to all countries all over the world. So in fact, you can see, okay, whether you are growing or you are even stagnated, okay, the black bar is always a key contributor as well. Okay, then the second factor is food prices. With the world population hitting 7 billion, yet we still have natural disaster, alright, we're depleting, alright, our food resources. We can see, alright, and expect food prices to escalate. So that again contribute to inflation. So prices are always rising. You don't expect to see prices dipping at all. So that's why for Japan, the only thing that is dipping, they call it others, would be very much like, alright, accommodation, alright, rental, it might drop, wages might have dropped. but there is still inflation in the country. So in summary, inflation rate all over the world is positive. Okay, and the two key factors that will stay positive is food prices and energy prices. It's just that, right, inflation goes out of control in these two countries. Right, it could be, as long as it's more than 3%, is considered very serious already. Right, because remember, wages increase very slowly. In fact, wages usually go up only 2%. Okay, if you're a civil servant, I think you only get what, $100 odd per year. It's very, very small. Okay, so in this case, wages will find it hard to catch up with prices. So countries with have a high inflation rate will actually suffer. Okay, now after countries report their respective inflation rate, for example, we know, say China, it's about cumulative of say 4.8%. After knowing inflation rate, it doesn't stop there. It will actually formulate what we call the expected inflation rate. Alright, we will begin to know, for the past 3 months, 6 months, inflation in China 4.8. And we will expect the prices to continue to escalate. So we will formulate our expected inflation rate. And of course, we know from there, we will start to adjust wages. So inflation is like a forest fire. You light a match in the forest. It's just whether how fast the flames will spread. Alright, okay? And in fact, once the flames spread, we know the wage spiral phenomenon will set in. Okay? So what is our expectation on inflation? Okay, so let's look at this chart. This is for US. Okay, that generally the Americans perceive that inflation in their country for 5 to 10 years, can you see, it's almost 3%. And that's very logical. Everyone is aware there is always shortage of oil and food. So we do expect inflation in the long run, average out to be 3%. Nobody sets inflation expectation to be 0. Nobody expects prices to be constant. They know it's escalating. Prices are picking up, but they expect it to be about 3. So that is usually your long run expectation. But now if you actually look at your short run, you can see short run it fluctuates, usually due to economic crisis. So look at this period. This is post-September 11. People grew pessimistic. So they know prices will increase but slow down. Because people choose to stay at home, people will actually not buy assets anymore. So they expect price increment to be smaller. Okay, then the other dip is here that we saw. Okay, the financial meltdown in US. Right, with high bankruptcy, workers out of job, they were retrenched. Right, a lot of banks restructuring. They lower their inflation expectation in the short run. So all of us hold inflation expectation by looking at economic data and look at economic situation. So the same goes for Singapore. Alright, we know transport prices will go up. Okay, so we know, right, prices will never drop. So we still expect inflation to hover about 2%. Okay, and Singapore, we like to talk about our cash over valuation for HDB prices. Right, so recently they say, COV, alright, drops to 0. You don't pay cash anymore. It means housing prices have stabilized. So people will form expectation. Alright, they know property prices will not escalate tremendously. So they know, okay, forming an expectation of 2 to 3% inflation in Singapore is reasonable. So we always form expectation by reading the news, by talking to people on the streets, okay, or from government's policy. So we form inflation expectation, but it will never be 0. Look at the September 11 crisis, it's still not 0. Because we know we still have escalating food and energy prices. Okay, so that's the perspective of inflation. I leave it to you to read the rest. That's quite easy, right, to tell you in words the cause of inflation. Right, that inflation can be harmful to different groups of people. And they have been actually taught in Year 1 economics, but here we merely summarize them in key points. And as you read through, some of them have been taught in topic 2 when I taught you nominal and real interest rate. Okay, so let's move on. Let's go to this page. Zero inflation given in page 24. So seems like, right, inflation is to stay. Alright, okay? Then would government wants to therefore bring down inflation rate to 0? Since zero inflation looks good, prices are stable. Okay, here there are actually 3 benefits of low inflation rate. Price increase can be good. Okay, think carefully. It can be good because it's a source of revenue for government. Right? Imagine your goods, you have to pay GST. Okay, 7% of $1 versus 7% of 150. Price goes up, government also earns 7% of the 50-cent increment. So inflation can be a source of revenue to the government. But remember, it must be low inflation. Prices cannot double. If prices double, we don't even buy. Then government cannot collect the tax. So some amount of inflation, ranging from 1 to 2%, is healthy. So it's a source of revenue for government. Okay? We also know that a positive inflation will tell you, right, how banks can actually set interest rates. That your nominal interest rate must go up to cover inflation. So that tells you the economy is healthy. We cannot have zero interest rate. Banks will collapse. Positive interest rate will allow the banks to operate, alright, in the normal behavior. We will park our money in the banks can lend out. Okay? And then finally, some amount of inflation is good because firms will then hire the workers. If prices are dipping, yet the firms have to pay salary to the workers, the firms will suffer and there will be massive retrenchment. So some form of inflation is good. It means the firm's price can cover wages. Right? So after reading through the cause of inflation, you must gather inflation is bound to stay. But do we go for zero inflation? The answer is no. Right? Low inflation, about 2% is acceptable. It shows the economy is very healthy. Okay, so you have to bear in mind that you should never say prices drop. Prices drop is deflation. It's very harmful. Okay, so that's the concept of inflation. Okay, so now we want to combine the 2 concepts. Right, we have the concept of unemployment. Okay, and we know unemployment, serious or not, we measure it with the natural rate. Then we have briefly seen the concept of inflation to know that it is definitely positive. So if we combine the 2 of them, we can read the 2 phenomenon under the Phillips curve. Okay, right? Now I want to warn you that the Phillips curve is not an easy concept. And you might want to study it after the prelims. So between now and the prelims, focus more on your first 4 tutorials, your basic ISLM models first. Don't study Phillips curve yet, because Phillips curve is one of the toughest concepts in macroeconomics because it's quite abstract. The equation is complicated, the diagram is simple, but there's a lot of behavior encompassed in the analysis. Okay? Now some of you have heard about Phillips curve, have seen the Phillips curve before, but you may not be aware it actually came from the model that I have briefly introduced to you, known as the price setting, wage setting model. Okay, so let's look at our notes and just complete the key concepts. So just a while ago we saw, right, wage setting is by the workers. Okay, so remember in the exam, if you couldn't write out the equation, write out the intuition. The first factor that affects wages is expected price level. What you think prices will be in the next 3, 6, and 9 months and thereafter. That will have a direct impact on your wages. But how much wages can go up depends on your bargaining power, Z. Right, can you see? That's why Z is a fraction of PE. It will tell you how much it can push up wages for you. But you will also must look at the economic phenomenon, unemployment rate. So it's minus UT. Right, your current or your actual unemployment rate. So that is wage setting. Price setting, you should know, is by firms. Okay, and you know firms must definitely cover wages. But how much to cover? It is 1 plus the mu. Okay, so firms must mark up wages to make profit. How much you mark up? The size is a mu. Okay, so I will always narrate this to myself. Even if I can't write out the equation, I will write in words. The 3 factors affecting wages. After workers have set wages, the firms will set prices by marking up. Okay, so at equilibrium, equilibrium means labor supply equals labor demand. Alright? So it's equivalent to say wage setting is price setting. Okay? Now, I'm just giving you the broad picture. I don't want you to worry about derivation. Remember, okay, this topic itself, alright, we are not preparing you for section B. We are only preparing you for section A. Derivation is not required. So you only run through the key equations we'll do. Okay, so you equate the two, rewriting, you can see, substitute the W by the wage setting equation and you will get PE 1 plus mu times 1 plus Z minus alpha UT. Okay, now, step 3 and 4, derivation is not required, but I want to highlight, while we are looking at this equation, if you recall, you have a mu and a Z. Mu and Z affects your UN. Just a while ago, before the break, remember we said a country, whether unemployment is serious or not, UT must compare with UN. So you have the UN appearing already because you have your mu plus Z. Okay? Then when you look at P and PE, you're looking at change in prices. You're looking at price gap between now and the future. So that is inflation rate. Alright? So writing down equation 1 is sufficient in the exam to tell us, alright, that wage setting, price setting allows us to study the behavior of change in prices and unemployment problem. Okay? So from equation 1, all you need to do is to quote equation 3. The detailed derivation is not required at all. So don't freak out. Alright? Nobody asks you to do the derivation. So far, those that I need you to derive, you can see I will walk through with you and I give you lots of practice. All this, in fact, from topic 7, a lot of equations I skip because they are not crucial. Okay? So in this case, rewriting the equation, alright, adjusting the term, this is the Phillips curve. So it looks a bit daunting because it has minus sign all the way. Okay? So there are 2 ways to read this equation. You use this equation for you to draw later on. But if you want to interpret, I will do it this way. I will bring the pi across. Then I have minus alpha ut minus un. Okay? I call this the inflation gap, which is change in pi. Okay? And I call this the unemployment gap, which is minus change in U. So that will tell you inflation and unemployment goes opposite direction. Okay, alright, so this is what the Phillips curve is about. It attempts to reflect 2 economic indicators. Okay, and from the wage setting, price setting model, and through the basic derivation, the equation 3 shows inflation and unemployment moves opposite direction. Okay, and the best way to explain is China. Okay, this is typed up for you, but I'll write up the analysis in basic steps for you. So in China, we know, alright, aggregate demand goes up. Okay, example, the export has been very strong. Okay, their export markets are developing. Firms move into China for production. So we know in this case, right, output must go up. Okay, and it is via labor demand going up. You need to hire the workers. Because China, no matter what, is still pretty much labor intensive. Right, so the production of foodstuff, production of clothing, and right, you still need workers. Okay, so I'll go all the way here down to show you. So if labor demand goes up, it means unemployment rate goes down. And specifically must be lower than UN. Okay, to tell you, UN is your minimum unemployment. You are now even lower than it. It means the labor market is very tight. People in the past who cannot find jobs, they don't have the correct skills, right? They have poor attitude, now can even find jobs. That's the meaning of U less than UN. So that tells you, therefore, wages can go up. Look at what I'm doing. I'm applying wage setting model, but I didn't write the equation at all. All I deduce is why unemployment rate goes down, and workers take the opportunity to increase wages. Okay, then I apply price setting. Okay, now price will increase, but I should use the word faster. Always remember, prices are always increasing, okay, because of oil and foodstuff. But now, increase in wages will hasten it. So it should not be P increase, but price increase faster. And that tells you pie increases. Right, so you can see, right, U goes down, pie goes up. This is the Phillips curve. Right? But it doesn't end there. Okay? After the pie goes up, in the next paragraph, over time, pi E will go up. Right? That is what's happening in China. After inflation took place for years, people began to accept that things are going to be very expensive. Then wages goes up again. So that's why in China, right, inflation is the key problem. Government is trying very hard to cool down the economy. Because wage spiral, when the moment it takes place, it will become a forest fire. It is never ending. So over here, right, in the bottom of page 25, I'm showing you how to use the Phillips curve without using the equation. It's simply pi and U. Inflation and unemployment rate goes opposite direction. How did it came about? Wage setting, price setting. So hear me carefully in the exam. If you really forgot this whole chunk, and it's quite easy to forget because we are not doing any calculation. We don't even draw the two lines at all. Then how do you explain Phillips curve? You choose China, you talk about unemployment, wages and prices. It will set you off to explain pi and U. Okay? So in this case now, let's look at another country. So now let's look at, for example, Spain. Okay? So for Spain, we know aggregate demand drops. Because, right, everybody is getting very pessimistic. The banking crisis there don't seem to be resolved. Okay, so in this case, we know firms will cut back output. It means firms don't produce, instead they take from their warehouse. Labor demand will drop. That's where retrenchment takes place. Unemployment will go up. Okay, but to denote that it's so serious, it must be higher than the natural rate. So always remember, it is pointless to say unemployment goes up or down. It's only comparing to the natural rate, then you can reflect the severity of the problem. You might have done it in your foundation days. You keep saying unemployment go up, unemployment go up. But in macro, it's very specific. If it goes up, it must be making cross-reference to the natural rate to signify how crucial it is. So remember, Spain's natural rate is 18%. So you're saying that now unemployment is more than 18 to show that it is so devastating. and therefore wages will drop. Price must still go up, but now slower. Remember, in Spain, they still have food shortages, they still have energy crisis like anywhere in the rest of the world. So price increase slower, pie drops. Alright, so again, what do you see? Unemployment rate goes up, but pie goes down. That is, right, the descriptive behavior of the Phillips curve in words, which is as good as writing an equation. Okay, so a lot of times students are quite disturbed by equation 3. It's not easy to memorize equation 3 because you don't derive it. By now, most of you can memorize ISLM already because you keep deriving it until you get so used to it. Same goes with Solo's model. Alright, after exposing using the calculation, you get used to it. You can depend on equation. Phillips curve, you can't. Alright, so if you can't rely on your memory work, then rely on your economic analysis. As long as you can explain which setting, price setting, the behavior of pi and u will appear. Okay, so with this equation and this behavior in mind, we want to sketch this curve. So we move on to page 26. It's the same equation that you saw in equation 3. But remember, by now, this is already topic 7. Whenever I want to draw the curve, I must know the slope and the intercept. But how do I know slope and intercept? First, I must look at the axis of the diagram, which I plotted for you first. So to draw the Phillips curve is to measure pi t and ut. So when I write my equation, I must make sure equations start with pi t, end with ut. So from there, right, this is what I get. Right, the term on the left will still stay, but I will group pi e with a plus alpha un. I will multiply the minus inside, and I will group them together. Right, and I know this portion is my vertical intercept because they are independent of ut, the actual unemployment rate. So I know they will shift my Phillips curve, which I will discuss later. Then with the minus sign, I know the Phillips curve is downward sloping. Okay, and also I know this is the slope. So it's the same technique that I've been teaching all this while. Right, so no matter what equations we give you, if you know the axis of the diagram, you will shape the equation by grouping all the independent variables together. They are all independent of ut. Alright, they are on its own. It's a given value of un and pi e. They will form your intercept. Then the balance, you can see where is the slope. Okay, so the slope is alpha. So alpha is usually a constant value. Okay, alpha is usually constant. So that's how we know the Phillips curve is a downward sloping straight line. In fact, actually I put here already. Okay, now however, when we draw the Phillips curve, we don't happily draw a straight line. The first thing to do to the Phillips curve is look at the axis, put in the percentage. The reason why it is difficult to understand the Phillips curve is because the axes are not absolute values. Right from topic 1 to topic 6, either you do IBC, investment curve, consumption curve, ISLM, BP. They are all absolute values. Interest rate, income. Alright, Y1, Y2, C1, C2. They are absolute values, whereas this both are movements of values. This is change in price. This is change in number of unemployed. So it makes it difficult to graph it when both items are in percentage. Okay? Now, I want you to focus a lot on vertical axis, put in a zero axis. To keep telling you, as long as you operate above the zero axis, pi is positive, meaning to say all the discussion should keep telling you prices are always increasing. So when we read the Phillips curve, we must be very careful. We are looking at the real-world phenomenon. We are plagued by oil shortage, food shortages, prices are always increasing, inflation rate is always positive. So pay attention to this axis. Okay? Then this is step number 1. You don't draw the curve. You deliberately go to the horizontal axis. Mark out the country's UN. Every country has a UN. US 6.9, Spain 18. Right? Netherlands, I think it's like 3.2. Right? Every country has her own UN. But what does UN means? Right? This is actually given in the table. When your unemployment rate it is at the natural rate. This is known as full employment. Okay? So the meaning of full employment means, right, P and W are stable. So much so that wage setting equals price setting. So how do workers set wages? They look at PE. Percentage change in PE is pi E. How do firms set prices? Firms look at wages. But after they set prices, change in prices is pi. So in other words, when you are at point A, alright, you are at full employment, wages and prices are stable. They don't go up and down anymore. Alright, firms, or should I say workers, dare not ask for higher salary because all of them are employed. And firms already adjusted prices. So this terminology is known as, alright, so you put it in, this is actually like your U0. So your current unemployment rate is the natural rate. Your current inflation rate, pi naught, is pi E. You can put in as a pi E naught. So it's not easy. Spend time studying point A. Alright? You cannot read the Phillips curve immediately. And that's always the biggest mistake. Students treated Phillips curve like ISLN and BP. Just move along it, which is wrong. Phillips curve must come from understanding step 1 very importantly. Point A, at full employment, wages and prices don't change anymore. It's equivalent to inflation rate, is the expected inflation rate. Okay? Then we draw in the straight line. Okay, you can call this the PC. And there is no other version. The Phillips curve nearly look like that. Okay, not like BP curve can be steeper or flatter. For Phillips curve, it's just a straight line. Okay, so what is important is how to interpret the Phillips curve. So we use this curve. Okay, now let's do a point. Let's say we move on to U1. So this is your step 2. Okay, if unemployment rate were to go higher than the natural rate, okay, which we by now should know, you will touch a point B, okay, on your Phillips curve. But you have to explain the behavior. You cannot say the curve say pi drops. You have to always deploy wage setting, price setting behavior. Okay, so we go to the second row in the lecture notes. So if unemployment goes up to U1, okay, on your Phillips curve, it's point B. So workers will therefore beat down wages. Okay, and firms, okay, be very careful. Right? Try not to say firms reduce price. So instead we should say firms will increase price but slower. So that in our mind we are clear. Firms must always cope with oil and foodstuff prices or food prices, raw material prices. But wages slow down, price increase also slow down. So change in price will be smaller, inflation rate will drop, in this case, to pi 1. That's where we go to our notes. At the diagram, you can see. Right, that is how you interpret the Phillips curve. Right, that inflation and unemployment goes opposite direction. But how do you read the Phillips curve? You read horizontal, then you read vertical. Not the opposite. It's not prices affect unemployment. It's unemployment affect prices. Because you are using wage setting, price setting model. Right, so the WSPS model is very important. It's not about the equation, it's about the behavior of the workers affecting the behavior of the firms, resulting inflation rate in the country to go downwards. So in this case, you can see this is a movement from A to B. Right, so given a level of pi E, which is the intercept, okay, changes in unemployment rate, in this case we go rightwards, right, will therefore bring down inflation rate. But is this a positive phenomenon? The answer is no. Although inflation rate drops, but you have high unemployment. So imagine if this is Spain, UN is 18, now unemployment is 20. Right, so 20% of your workforce unemployed is very significant. So that brings you to understand keeping a low UN is important. Right, if you have a low UN, then your unemployment rate increase. But your U1 could only be, say, 4%, which is tolerable. So keep in mind the concept of UN. Okay, now let's use the diagram and discuss the opposite direction. Instead of going to the left, now we go to the right. That in the country, okay, your unemployment rate could have now instead dropped. So let's call this U2. So we get a point on the Phillips curve. Let's call this point D. Okay, so we're going to explain based on the diagram, the Phillips curve predicted inflation rate will go up to pi 2.